So the final serial has arrived of Season 2. Dennis Spooner has left his post as script editor, allowing him to write this final adventure, with Douglas Camfield returning to direct. With a new companion to be introduced to, with what appears to be a historical about the Battle of Hastings. On the surface, that is a good description of the Time Meddler, a serial which, like with most Dalek and Cybermen serials, has a title which gives away more than it should. But here we have a serial which changes the game for Doctor Who. What appears to be a historical on the surface is subverted by a twist unlike any the show has given us so far. But let's get this introduction over and get into the meat and bones of this serial, as we've got a lot to talk about. Will this be a comedy, or will it be serious? Spooner has given us both so far with his previous serials, but where does this one fall? Time to find out. Picking up from where the chase left us, the Doctor and Vicky are all which remains of the quartet. The Doctor is still clearly upset at having to say goodbye to his friends. Vicky comforts him, but their moment together is interrupted by a noise, which they fear could be a Dalek, which managed to enter the TARDIS. But it turns out to be Stephen Taylor, who managed to escape from the Mechanoid City, before stumbling across the TARDIS which he entered. And don't worry, he did bring Hi-Fi with him. Here we have some moments of pure gold as Stephen regains consciousness and adjusts to the setting. We have his initial reaction.
I don't seem to remember much about it. I remember registering that, well, it didn't look like a ship. It was very small. I must have been delirious.
I don't suppose you were. It is very small outside. It's just in here it's big.
Oh, come off it.
Before Vicky explaining the inner dimensions, in which she mistakenly refers to it as dimensions, not dimension.
TARDIS. T-A-R-D-I-S. It stands for time and relative dimensions in space.
This mistake I don't believe was corrected at any point in the classic era, and so dimensions was the term used for the remainder of the original series. Beyond that, we have this iconic moment where the Doctor tells Stephen what everything is.
That is the dematerializing control, and that over yonder is the horizontal hold. Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
Stephen is of course still in disbelief of the TARDIS being the police box he walked into, and that it's both a spaceship and time machine, so the trio go out to prove it. Here we get several more iconic moments, notably this one.
Well, there you are, young man. What do you think of that now, eh? A Viking helmet.
Maybe.
What do you mean, maybe? What do you think it is, a space helmet for a cow?
But this scene does bring up an interesting point, as when we later see the Vikings, they're not wearing horned helmets. So was it in fact a space helmet for a cow after all? Then there's this.
It'd be much quicker to go up here.
Yes, so possibly it might, but I'm not a mountain goat, and I prefer walking to any day, and I hate climbing.
One of the most iconic flubs of the show. While this is going on, the trio are watched and studied by a peculiar monk, who after they leave to explore takes an interest in the TARDIS, in a way others haven't before. But this peculiarity grows as he checks his wrist, seemingly missing something. With the trio split up into two, we have a few things happening. Firstly, a villager named Eldred has seen the TARDIS and so goes to tell their leader, Wolnorth, who accompanies him to the beach. The Doctor soon finds this village, where he meets Edith, the wife of Wolnorth. Now, if Edith looks familiar to anyone, that's because her actress is Aletha Charlton, who previously played her in An Unearthly Child. From Edith, the Doctor gets enough information to figure out when and where they've landed.
It must be 1066.
This scene also shows the Doctor drinking mead, clearly out of politeness, as he is shown to not have the most positive reaction to the flavour, even pouring it away when he gets the chance. This scene also includes a very notable change to the script, in which according to script editor Donald Tosh, Hartnell completely forgot his lines, but wanting to make sure the historical information got through for the kids, made up the lines on the spot, from his own memory of the events. The fact the Doctor says, "Now let me think," does seem to support this, plus the original scripts would have this difference in them, although I haven't seen them. Right after this is when the Doctor hears the monk singing coming from the monastery distort, which raises his suspicions, making him go to the monastery. Here he finds a record player which is playing the monk singing, which could be heard from the village. But as he chuckles to himself, he becomes trapped and comes face to face with the monk. The monk imprisons the Doctor, allowing Hartnell to take a week holiday for episode 2. Because of this, the plot does slow as we follow Vicky and Stephen. Before we move over to them though, I'll discuss the monk's opening scene of episode 2, where we see him making a modern day breakfast with eggs, bacon and toast using modern day appliances, notably a toaster which seems to be misbehaving itself. When I say modern day I mean the mid-60s. Combine this with the record player and the wristwatch, which I haven't mentioned but is found by Stephen, clearly something about this monk isn't right. With the Doctor a prisoner of the monk, I'll discuss Vicky and Stephen's plot line. So with Stephen new to adventuring through space and time, he's a lot more reckless than Vicky, who spends a lot of time trying to keep him in check and from doing anything stupid. Notably, we have Stephen attacking a villager with Vicky having to tell him to stop. This is where Stephen gets his hands on the wristwatch. This more action-orientated approach to things is something we see a few times with Stephen, although he does show that he can think things through, not always going for action. This is quite notable when they go to see the monk in search of the Doctor, with Stephen being able to trick the monk into giving away that he has seen the Doctor.
Perhaps you'd keep a lookout for him. Are you sure you'll remember his description?
Long white hair, a black cloak, and rather strange check.
That's it, you've got it. Fine.
We didn't give him a description of the Doctor.
Well, that means he must have seen him, doesn't it?
Vicky and Stephen are captured at one point by the villagers, but the leader Warnov soon believes them to be travellers due to Edith's intervention, allowing them to continue on and being quite generous by giving them food. This is something Eldred disagrees with him tending to be a lot more distrustful of people, which works to the trio's advantage later. By the end of episode 2, Vicky and Stephen manage to find the Doctor's cell, but by the time they arrive it's empty, the Doctor having escaped through a secret passage. During this, a group of Vikings arrive ahead of the main fleet, which the monk is preparing to destroy, with these Vikings ending up being a problem for the monk. But before they can, they attack the village with the leader... Okay, this is a bit of an interesting subject to discuss. The leader of the Vikings is named Sven, who attacks Edith, leaving her in a traumatised state. But the novelisation refers to Sven as a violator of women, leading to the implication that he, well, you can't say that word on here, so hopefully you get the idea. Quite dark for a kids show, even if the suggestion is in the novelisation. This does make Sven's eventual death far more satisfying, at least it would if it hadn't been cut with the footage still missing to this day. Although there is this. So that's something. There isn't too much to say about the Vikings, as they aren't a notable presence themselves. Most of the scouting party are killed immediately, leaving Sven and Ulf being the only survivors. As the serial is focused on the monk, these two aren't the most interesting, with them only acting as nuisances for the Doctor and the monk. The monk does try to use them to assist him by pretending to be helping the Vikings, but these plans are foiled by Eldred witnessing them together while recovering in the monastery after the first battle with the Vikings. I think now's the best time to discuss the monk. I've hinted a lot about his plans, but I've been keeping back on a lot of the details about him. So it's quite clear that the monk is a time traveller. He has technology that is from the future, all of which is now about 60 years out of date at the time of writing this, with his plan being to change history by wiping out the Vikings, preventing King Harold from having to march to Stamford Bridge to defeat them prior to the Battle of Hastings. In the monk's mind, this would cause King Harold to win the battle, kicking William the Conqueror back to Normandy.
They'll think there's a landing place. They'll come in unsuspecting. And then...
Well, out with it.
I'm going to destroy them.
So that's it. You're a time meddler.
Doctor, it's more fun my way. I can make things happen ahead of their time.
Is that so?
Yes.
In fact, he has a checklist of his plan, as seen here, with the list being arrival in North Cumbria, position atomic cannon, sight Vikings, light beacon fires, destroy Viking fleet, Norman landing, Battle of Hastings, meet King Harold. Obviously the ramifications of this would be massive with all of world history changed, but seemingly for the betterment of the world. The monk talks about how he can guide humanity with hints and tips, saying that they can have jet airliners by 1320, and that Shakespeare would be able to put Hamlet on television. The monk is not a malicious villain. His goals are quite similar to those of Barbara and the Aztecs, but on a global scale, which he can actually understand the impact of, or at least to a degree. This is where we have to discuss the big twist, the final cliffhanger of the serial, plus the season. While the monk is a time traveller, from the previous serial we know that time travel isn't something unique to the Doctor, which is what makes this cliffhanger all the more impactful.
We can get inside.
It's a TARDIS. The monk's got a TARDIS.
A TARDIS. Not just another time machine, but another time machine just like the Doctor's. The monk is from the same place and time as the Doctor with only a 50-year difference between them, the monk coming from a later point in time. This reveal is huge, as now the TARDIS is not unique and instead something commonly produced with different models, as the monk's is a Mark IV, while the Doctor deflects from his particular model. Now, despite meeting another of the Doctor's race, we don't learn anything about them, but there are a few hints which interestingly suggest a human origin for the Doctor and the monk. This idea may sound out of nowhere, but let's look at the monk's plans and his TARDIS. We know from the monk's plans that he intends to speed up the development of Earth, but we also learn that the monk has interfered in Earth history before, notably mentioning how he assisted in creating Stonehenge with the use of his anti-gravitational lift. Then within his TARDIS we see several items he has collected, with a room full of items from Earth history, without any signs of anything from other planets. He also keeps a diary which includes entries which say, he put £200 in a London bank in 1968, then went 200 years into the future to make a fortune on interest, as well as his meeting with Leonardo da Vinci where he discussed the principle of powered flight. We have no hints of him doing this sort of thing with other planets, with him talking about Earth history in a way a human would. This all comes together to suggest that the monk, and therefore the Doctor, are from Earth's, or at least humanity's future. Now this is of course just my interpretation of what's being presented to us, but it feels quite deliberate. The Doctor has never been confirmed he is an alien, so at this point in the show it's still possible for him to be a human from the far future. This is something I pointed out when I discussed some of the deleted dialogue in The Chase. So returning to the plot, the Doctor has been reunited with Vicky and Stephen, with all of them being tied up. But due to the villagers turning on the monk, the trio are freed, allowing the Doctor to take precautions to prevent the monk from interfering in the history of Earth again, this being by removing the monk's TARDIS's dimensional control, causing the interior dimensions to shrink.
He's ruined my time machine. I'm marooned. Marooned! 1066.
This obviously traps the monk in 1066, at least for the time being. With history back on track, the trio return to the TARDIS, leaving 1066 behind them, where we get this nice ending to the episode and series as a whole, with a shot of the trio's faces on top of the stars. This is also the first time there is no next time caption. I wonder if any viewers were scared by that. So with any historical, or in this case pseudo-historical, I need to discuss my view of the Doctor's ability to change history, given that this serial focuses heavily on that idea, with it seemingly being possible. It's very important to talk about. For a quick recap, several previous serials, notably the Aztecs and the Reign of Terror, present time travellers as being able to change history, with time itself finding a way to keep itself on track despite interference. Looking at this serial, the main thing is the monk's plan to destroy the Viking fleet, which I don't think would have worked out. Given that the Viking scouting party's arrival led to Eldred being injured, which allows him to see the Vikings in the monastery, you'll notice that the trio didn't have much impact on how these events played out, meaning that it's highly possible that the monk would have been foiled, although not trapped in 1066. Alternatively, we could look at this idea from a different perspective, where somehow the forces of time sent the Doctor to 1066 to stop the monk, meaning that the Doctor was important to the events, but the same principle of time preventing itself from changing still applies. This is something which will definitely come up again in future historicals, so we'll see if this does apply. So apart from a slower middle section due to Hartnell's holiday, the Time Meddler is still an incredibly strong serial. It's definitely not a traditional historical, the first pseudo-historical, which is the type which comes up far more in later seasons, after the traditional historical had been phased out. It sets out the groundwork well for future serials, with hinting at the Doctor's true origins, while also giving us that bombshell of a change to the status quo, with the introduction of a second TARDIS. It's certainly not as funny as Spooner's previous serials, but instead gives us an incredibly strong character in the monk, while also trying out a new type of serial. Douglas Camfield's direction is on point too, with the entire serial being studio bound, but really having a sense of being filmed by the sea. Whenever on the cliffside or at the TARDIS landing site, there really is a sense of this being the coast. The serial is definitely one of the best of this series. It's incredibly memorable, with its one fault being entirely due to outside factors, but even so, it's still able to get around that. It's a perfect ending to the second season,